All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are absolutely not here to cheerlead. Instead, we're going to perform a cold, clinical, forensic autopsy on one of the most famous success manuals of the last 2 decades, Darren Hardy's The Compound Effect. We're putting this text right on the examination table to dissect exactly what it actually argues versus what millions of people just assume it says. We'll be using the book's very own claims against itself to find its strongest mechanics, its weakest links, and that one core argument that threatens to entirely collapse under its own logic. To do this, we'll follow a strict roadmap today, starting with the grand promise, stripping away the hype, and then breaking down the core operating system. Finally, we'll examine the mechanics of momentum and the dangerous complacency trap. We are going to systematically strip away all the self-help fluff and examine the objective mechanics of this system.
So, Section 1, the grand promise, examining the marketing and expectations. Every good autopsy has to start by looking at the outer layer, the wrapper that draws the reader in to begin with.
Notice the sheer velocity implied by the packaging here. Just look at the bold cover text. It promises a system to jumpstart your income, your life, your success. Now, the word jumpstart is a highly specific marketing choice. It implies immediate electricity, an instant spark. It literally sells the reader on the idea that the contents inside are going to act like jumper cables for a stalled life. Open the cover, and that hype is immediately amplified. The foreword, written by Tony Robbins, highlights the author's own rapid ascent, stating he earned more than $1 million a year by age 24 and built a $50 million company by age 27. I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? It sets these sky-high, get-rich-quick expectations right out of the gate. But, as we're about to see, this creates a massive, almost jarring contrast with what the actual text of the book demands of the reader.
Moving to Section 2, stripping away the hype. This is where things get interesting, because this is where we separate the clinical reality of the book from that explosive marketing wrapper.
The author actually slaps a clinical warning label on the strategy right before Chapter 1 even begins. He explicitly states, "Warning, these chapter headings look simple, but most people ignore them." He is preemptively telling you, the reader, that you probably think you already know the secret to success. It's a fascinating admission. He's essentially telling you up front that this information isn't new, and worse, human nature dictates you're likely going to ignore it precisely because of its simplicity.
The text then systematically attacks the pop culture myth of the overnight fix. The book explicitly calls out the total nonsense of losing 30 pounds in a week with a Hollywood diet or fixing your life with 3 easy payments of $39.95. Instead, the premise presented is incredibly sobering. Earning success is hard. In his exact words, the process is laborious, tedious, and sometimes even boring. So that's the clinical reality. There is no jumpstart. There is only a slow, arduous grind.
Let's move right into Section 3, the core operating system, small choices, and tracking. If the marketing was the glossy paint job, this is the heavy engine block. Stripped of all the fan energy, here's the clinical definition of the compound effect. It is simply an operating system where profound success is the result of small, smart choices completed consistently over time. That's it. It's essentially a mathematical law, the application of compounding interest to human behavior. You are not making miraculous quantum leaps here. You are accumulating tiny fractional gains over a span of 31 months or maybe even 31 years. It's certainly not flashy, but it is mathematically sound. Now, in our autopsy today, I would absolutely classify this as the book's strongest chapter. The absolute, unsexy core of this system requires what the author calls a go-to transformation model. What is that? Tracking. Relentless, tedious tracking. He insists you track every single behavior for at least 1 whole week, whether it's what you eat, how much you exercise, or your daily sales calls. You write it down. And the logic here is pretty ironclad. You cannot change what you do not measure. Exposing your unconscious, sabotaging habits to the harsh light of a tracking ledger is the only way to reprogram your operating system. Because think about it, if you don't know where every dollar or calorie is going, how can you possibly compound them?
Once you've established those highly tedious tracking habits, we enter Section 4, the mechanics of momentum, or what the book affectionately refers to as Big Mo.
The book brilliantly illustrates the physics of success here using a hand pump water well metaphor. Step 1. You expend massive, exhausting energy just to break inertia, furiously pumping the lever. Step 2. You have to push through the frustration and persevere, even when your massive effort yields only a few measly drops of water. This right here is where most people quit. Step 3. Eventually, you get a steady stream and pumping becomes easy, almost rhythmic. But look closely at Step 4. This is the critical warning. If you let go of the lever, even for a short vacation or a tiny break in your routine, the water falls all the way back down the pipe into the ground. You don't just pause your progress, you kill momentum completely and reset to zero. You have to start the exhausting pumping process all over again.
Which brings us to the fifth and final section of our autopsy, the complacency trap. Here is where we find the book's weakest link, or rather, the argument that practically collapses under its own logic. The book outlines a devastating paradox. It argues that the very prosperity you achieve through the compound effect inherently makes you too comfortable to maintain the very habits that built it. We transition from a hustle phase, which is defined by grit, hard work, and fortitude, directly into a sedentary phase. Overwhelming abundance leads to a lackadaisical mentality, so the system, if perfectly executed, essentially creates the exact environment that destroys the system. This paradox is brought to life by a highly specific anecdote about a local San Diego restaurant. Imagine the scene. Initially, the service was impeccable. The food was sensational, and people lined up for hours just to get a table. They were doing everything right. But because they became so extraordinarily successful, they got complacent. The hostesses stopped smiling, the service dropped off a cliff. The author explicitly states nothing fails like success. Once we experience extended periods of prosperity, we become just like the frog in boiling water, completely unaware that we are being cooked to death by our own comfort. The ultimate diagnosis here is that maintaining success might actually be significantly harder than achieving it, purely because comfort is the absolute enemy of momentum.
So, we reach our final verdict on the table. The compound effect is not a magic jumpstart. It's a relentless mechanical pump. Its cause of immortality is unwavering, tedious consistency. Its cause of death is the complacency that success itself breeds. To end our explainer today, I'll leave you with this final, clinical question to evaluate your own operating system against the cold facts we've just uncovered. Right now, in your own life, are you relying on a magic bullet, or are you consistently pumping the lever?